And then, despite growing up with a sister who actually has Usher syndrome, which means she's deaf, I really don't know how to sign that well. But she also grew up not knowing how to sign very well until she attended college. This is not due to neglect on my parents' part, but it's instead due to neglect regarding deaf education and culture. So, deaf knowledge is lacking, and there should be more effort into spreading sign language and awareness. My sister struggled growing up due to her hearing loss, mainly because she had no easier way to communicate. This is obviously my sister. On April 18th, 1994, she was born. 2 years later, exactly on the date, I was born. She's not very happy about it. So even at 2 years old, we didn't know that she had hearing loss, because babies weren't tested often at the hospital back then. According to HearingHealthFoundation.org, in 1993, 5% of babies were tested for their hearing in the hospital, but by 1997, 94% were. My mom said growing up that nobody, they didn't quite notice, because when you talk to babies, you often move your hands, so she would look at you so nobody caught on at first, but eventually she started to get worried about it. So eventually she was diagnosed with mild hearing loss, but there was no official reason for why. So this is me and my sister. That's her. So she started visiting the UT Case Hearing and Speech Center for speech and hearing therapy. Due to the label of mild hearing loss, she was not encouraged to learn sign language, or neither were my parents. She grew up being in a mainstream school with no extra help, except her hearing aids, which these are the ones she wears. Every photo I've shown of her, so far, she's wearing them, but you can barely tell. So she has hearing aids. Sadly, over the years, her hearing faded more and more, though. By senior year, a teacher suggested that she get an interpreter in the front of the classroom, but she didn't know how to sign, so that wasn't actually helpful. She was actually also embarrassed at the thought of having her own personal interpreter in a classroom, because she was already known as the deaf girl in school, and she wasn't exactly into that. Almost at the same time, she was both accepted into Gallaudet University, a college in Washington, D.C. for deaf individuals, and she was finally diagnosed with Usher syndrome, which I know I've mentioned what it is, but the National Institute of Deafness defines Usher syndrome as a condition that most commonly affects the eyesight and hearing, and causing them both to worsen over time, and there's no cure for it. So as of right now, she actually doesn't have a lot of hearing, and she has no peripheral vision. But she's pretty much I believe my sister would have struggled less growing up if deaf education was more widely taught and sign language was more universally accepted, because anyone can be born deaf or lose their hearing over time. Fevers, accidents, just old age can suddenly cause hearing loss. In fact, Rachel actually wasn't the only person in our family with Usher syndrome, which we didn't even know, because our great aunt had it, but she was never diagnosed, and they always thought she lost her hearing and vision over time. She recently passed away in the last few weeks, but up until the end, she had no vision and hardly any hearing. But there are ways to kind of take medicine to fix it, but it'll just delay it. But I believe my sister should have been taught sign language growing up. Without a diagnosis, there was no guarantee that she would keep hearing, which she did not. And she would have benefited her whole life from being able to speak two languages, from being around people like her and being able to communicate with others. Even more so, I believe my parents should have been taught sign language, or at least encouraged. They were very much discouraged from learning. According to deafed.net, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, while 88% of hearing parents cannot sign. Like I said, this is often due to prejudice against deaf people, lack of guidance to the parents, and sometimes even social statuses. People don't want to learn because they feel like it's beneath them. More so, I believe schools should teach sign language too. Unlike other cultures, anyone can be deaf, and there's no con and plenty of benefits to learning two languages. In fact, found on NAD.org, teaching sign language to all babies promotes earlier language development, and awareness to deaf issues can help deaf individuals have a better future. Throughout my sister's story, I hope to have shown the reasons why I believe this and believe it's so important. So, thank you.
Thank you.